James Colquhoun is the creator, director, and producer of a powerful feature film called Food Matters. I watched it this afternoon. It is very important, very timely, a very good synopsis of the big issues that face all of us. Anybody who goes shopping at a supermarket and eats what agribiz is foisting upon us and needs to pay attention to what they're shoving down their throats 3 times a day. James Colquhoun, thanks for being with us. Hope I didn't do too much harm to your name there. Hello?
Hi, George. It's a pleasure to be on the show and no problems. I completely forgive you for that. It's a difficult last name.
Well, I wouldn't want to have to spell it in a test. I don't know if you were able to hear the first part of the program with Mike Adams, but the one thing that the two of you share in common is it was his personal health issues that led him sort of down this path. You had, it's not your issues, but within your family you had some health issues that led you on the path that resulted in this documentary, Food Matters. Tell me about that story.
Yeah, that's correct, George. The journey started for us about 8 years ago, and my father was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, depression, and anxiety. And at the time, Laurentine and I, the producers of the documentary, we were studying nutrition in America through a college in Santa Cruz, California, and my father was undergoing treatment for his illnesses. And my father, coming from a professional background where people would entrust their business advice to him, when he was diagnosed with an illness, he trusted the medical profession and the best advice that they could offer. And the medical profession offered my father many different types of medication, and all these different types of medication that he tried basically complicated his condition further, resulting in a worsening of his side effects and a worsening of his overall condition, to the point where his side effects were becoming so severe that after 5 years bedridden with this illness, he was, contemplating even taking his own life, which he later found out was a known side effect of one of the drugs that he was taking. So Laurentine and I, the producers of Food Matters, really wanted to interject with my father's health and help, educate him on the importance of nutrition and natural approaches to combating his illness. And this is where the idea for the documentary came about, because when most people are sick, or, especially under the influence of pharmaceutical medications, there's many types of medications that make you quite listless and disinterested. And, reading a 300-page book on natural healing was not on his agenda. So, creating the documentary was a very important way for us to help get the message to my father and also to many other people out there that might be unnecessarily suffering.
Well, it's Food Matters is a wonderful and important and very powerful production, and it seems like the thesis, or at least one of the main messages, is delivered early in the film, and then again later. It's that good health makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't make a lot of dollars. That is a primary theme, right?
That is correct, and I think when most people are confronted with a health challenge, or they have to go to the doctor, or they're given some form of medication, I think what was important for us to convey in the documentary was the economics behind this industry. And this really is an industry, and this is where, once people really understand the ins and outs of how the medical industry, or the healthcare industry, or as we like to call it in the documentary, and as the Food Matters, more of the sickness industry, because the economics behind this industry is basically very simple. I mean, this industry thrives on treating illness, and it wants more work, and it wants more illness. And if they actually came up with solutions for preventing and curing illness, they'd be doing themselves out of work. So what we have to understand here, and what Food Matters, the documentary, shows, is that, like you said, I mean, good health, it makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't make a lot of dollars. And when you consider that the health industry, or the pharmaceutical industry, is a $500 billion a year worldwide conglomerate, And in North America, that's over $300 billion a year, just in North America alone. So we're talking extremely big business here, and the ethics behind the industry are very questionable. We have a lot of cases, and I look forward to explaining these in detail as we go throughout the show. There are a lot of cases where it is known that these medications do more harm than good, and natural, non-patentable approaches which are cheap and easy to access are being restricted from the public because it does not serve the interests of pharmaceutical conglomerates.
Let's talk for a couple... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
This is a really important concept because if once we understand this, and then we can free ourselves from this system and turn our power, take our power back and rely on what we know is working best.
Let's talk for a couple of minutes about the consequences of what we eat, sort of to set the stage for the rest of the conversation. As you were working on this documentary and you collect information and statistics on the health of Americans, for example, you learn a lot. Not only that we're obese, but we're incredibly unhealthy, and a lot of it is directly a result of food and what we're eating.
That's so correct, George. And a lot of the people that we interviewed for Food Matters, from David Wolf, Andrew Saul, Dr. Dan Rogers, Professor Ian Brighthope, and some medical journalists, Jerome Byrne and Philip Day. A lot of these people are coming from a medical industry. They're coming from a conventional medical background, and they've seen the failures of modern medicine, and they've converted over to natural approaches because they've discovered, like many other people out there, have discovered that the power of real food and natural food to prevent illness and to build your immunity naturally is so much more powerful and more effective than pharmaceutical and drug-based approaches. And some of the important concepts that we talk about in Food Matters when it comes to nutrition are concepts like raw foods. And the definition of raw foods are really foods that have not been heated above a certain temperature. And that temperature point is about 112 degrees Fahrenheit or 48 degrees Celsius, thereabouts. But over that point, when foods are heated, they lose the enzymes in the food, and they lose many of the nutrients in those foods as well that are susceptible to heat. And so as we're progressing, as our diet becomes more westernized, more technologically advanced because of what the food industry is providing us, as our diet is evolving, we are eating more and more processed foods. We're eating more and more heat-treated foods. We're eating more and more foods with chemical additives and preservatives and known addictive compounds that the food industry is putting in these foods to addict us to these foods. As we consume more of those foods and less whole, raw, organic, natural, local, plant-based foods, we're becoming sicker. And this is proven empirically with research, and it's also explained very clearly in the documentary. And so raw foods is a really important concept. Another important concept in the documentary is about superfoods, which are foods that we are discovering which have extraordinarily high nutrient qualities and very, in comparison to calories, so they're very powerful foods. And also the concept of organics, which is extraordinarily important not only for our health, but also for the environment and for reducing our dependence on agribusiness.
We'll touch on all those during the course of our conversation. I'd like to speak to this for just a moment or two. We heard in the last 2 hours, which I don't believe you were able to hear down there in Australia, but that the food companies produce this stuff. It makes us unhealthy. They get us addicted to things that are bad for us, and that sort of plays into the hands of the drug companies, which are there to offer us pharmaceuticals that don't cure us, that we need to take for the rest of our lives. That the two seem to go hand in hand, and I just wonder if in the course of working on Food Matters, whether or not you ever saw any evidence that that's on purpose or not, whether there was some sort of a board meeting where everyone decided that this is the way it was going to work.
Well, that's a fantastic question, George, and I think you're alluding to higher concepts here of the potential ideas, and many people are talking about conspiracies out there, about population control or one world government. These ideas in Food Matters, we didn't drill up to that level, should I say, in the documentary. But when we discovered this link between, and as I'm sure Mike Adams alluded to earlier in the conversation, as you just mentioned, as we discovered this link between the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industry and the medical health insurance industry, as you start to see the entire picture of how they're making us sick and then hooking us on their medications, I think you really do start to clearly see a pattern of manipulation and control. And as it comes down, it's so perfectly said by Jerome Byrne, one of the interviewees we interviewed in the documentary Food Matters, was, he talks about the perfect drug. And the perfect drug, from respects of the pharmaceutical industry, is one that doesn't cure you, but one that you need to take long term. And I think as you drill into that concept there, you start to understand the depth and breadth of the problem. And that the public has been so indoctrinated by the medical profession, and you have the proliferation of advertising in North America, especially. Over 25% of the TV commercials in North America are for pharmaceutical medications. So we have this industry that is concerned about self-perpetuation. The medical industry, or the sickness industry as we like to call it, wants more patients. They want more illness. They're only concerned with treating the symptoms and a reactive-based approach. And then when you discover also that some of the biggest performers in the pharmaceutical industry as far as drugs are concerned, some of the blockbuster drugs like the SSRI antidepressant medications, which are some of the best-selling medications in the world, all of the medications, most of the medications that the pharmaceutical companies produce are targeted at Western developed countries, and they're targeted at diseases of lifestyle, the very conditions that drugs are not very effective to treat. Drugs are very effective for acute disorders that require emergency, short-term, life-saving intervention. Drugs are very powerful there. But for long-term, chronic problems, difficult-to-treat problems such as depression, anxiety, cancer, heart disease issues, diabetes, obesity, these conditions are diseases of lifestyle. They're diseases of how we're eating, how we're relating with our environment, and how we're relating with our emotional health. And to treat that with a drug is one of the most ineffective approaches out there. And the drug companies know this, but they've found a very lucrative area to profit off. And you can get short-term symptom benefits from taking some of these medications, but they do nothing to address the underlying causes, which is deficiency and toxicity. And they're two very key concepts here. You have the deficiency of vitamins and minerals, and you have an over-toxicity with nutrients, and then you have an environment in your body that's going to be prone to disease and putting you into this system that is dependent on the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry.
And is depression, being tired and depressed and anxious and unhappy, that's a direct result of the foods that you eat?
Depression has been very closely linked to deficiencies within the brain and also toxicity as well, but in particular deficiencies within the brain. Now, if you can imagine that I restrict certain nutrients from your diet, such as, take for example, vitamin B3, which is linked very closely with depression